so something we can ask ourselves is, how might this trigger or this person or this situation be supporting my growth? Because we have to understand, the more that we can hold the duality within ourselves of the light and the shadow, we can also hold that in our relation to others. Yet so often everyone wants to get to the light.
Yeah, well, they think love is just the light, but love is both. Love is the light and the shadow.
Yes.
Welcome to the Love Department. I'm your host, Nik Lockhart. I'm a former matchmaker, a writer, a love theorist, and I'm also in therapy. The Love Department is the heartwarming podcast exploring the nature of love and relationships. Today on the show, we have a very special conversation with Courtney Clifford. Courtney is an NYU-trained and trauma-informed coach and equine-assisted psychotherapist based in New York City. She has worked as a coach and a facilitator for corporations like Porsche Cars of North America and with individuals, creatives, founders, and groups for more than a decade. Courtney's sessions delve into the nuanced dynamics of relationships, fostering deeper connections, self-trust, and more authentic, meaningful relationships. She's currently pursuing her master's degree in marriage and family therapy. In this interview, we talk about when is it the right time to try therapy, what people often get wrong about relationships, and how working on yourself while you're single can set you up for long-term success in the love department. And while you're here, please remember to like and subscribe to this podcast. We love hearing from you. Okay, let's get on with the conversation.
Thank you for being here because, you know, when I was building the podcast and I was thinking about like who I would want to invite on, because it is such a sacred space to me and to, I think, a lot of our listeners. I knew when I brought on a therapist to be able to talk about something as big and as meaningful in people's lives as love, that I wanted it to be someone that people could not only connect with, but feel like the genuine love and energy from. And that's something that I've always felt from you. And I'm really grateful to have you here.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here and that we connected in the way that we did.
Yeah.
There are no chance encounters. And I also felt that energy from the moment that we connected. And it's been so beautiful to see your conception of this, because I remember talking about it in the initial stages and being so excited, because nothing lights me up more than being expanded by people's love stories. And so it's just like surreal to be here however many months or a year later and be in conversation together. So thank you for having me.
Well, thanks for coming. And I love that you use the word expanded, because that's absolutely the purpose of this platform, is to be able to show people that relationships are not always what they appear, but they are really beautiful and really powerful, agents in our lives. I don't know about you, but I personally have learned so much from my relationships. And in the past year or so in particular, it became really more important to me to be able to not only share what I was learning, but to hear what other people were learning as well. When you think of love and how you've seen that play out, not just in your profession, but maybe also personally, what are some of the things that come to mind first?
So it's really relationship with self and how we relate to our own heart and the parts of ourselves. And then from that space, that extends out into how we relate to others and the experiences that we have in relationship to them.
Self was probably the thing that I was working on, I think, the most heavily before I met my partner. I was looking at all of the deep things, the demons, the dark places, the shadowy things that I wasn't fully owning in my own person. And as a result, I think a lot of the relationships prior to him were filled with a lot of the same patterns, a lot of the same issues or traumas, and they weren't things that necessarily were wrong with the other people.
I think we always have the right person at the right time for what it is that we need to learn, because relationships are such a beautiful initiation into coming home to ourselves if we're open to it. And we all, or most of us, have been through those experiences where you're like, wasn't I here 5 years ago? Not about shaming, but what's the common denominator here?
My mom used to say that all the time when I would complain about bosses. She would say, well, Nicole, what's the common denominator here? You've been going from job to job and you seem to be finding the same people and having the same issues. And it wasn't until I really took the inventory to say, okay, maybe I did show up a little bit late. Maybe this was the third time this week that, a call got lost or dropped, and did the self-work to improve my side of the street, that then my relationships with my bosses began to improve as well.
Yeah, and it's all related, because how we relate to ourselves is how we relate to other people, and work is a relationship too. Whether you work for yourself or you work for someone else, how are you relating to your clients? How are you relating to your manager? And oftentimes it always comes back to our family of origin and those primary experiences that we have that we then live out in our present day.
Yeah, I can think of a few couples from season 1 where we talked about just the family stories that they had and how it impacted their view of love even long before they met this person that they would one day fall in love with.
So we all come from a family of origin, even if we didn't have contact with that family. And then also keeping in mind the generations that come before us as well.
I think what you're saying is that it's not about us. Like we come into relationships with already having had these pre-existing relationships and parts of ourselves that maybe were our story, maybe they were a family member, an ancestor of some sort, but we come with all of that, whether we know it or not, into partnership.
And so oftentimes we can be seeking out in our present day what wasn't given to us within our family of origin. We all assume a role.
Right.
And that role that we assume helps the family function. And the question becomes, is it healthy functioning? So with that, in looking back at those early experiences, it really unearths what I can guarantee you with every single client session that I sit in. Like, let's go back to an earlier time. It's more about what perhaps were the feelings that happened and beliefs that were instilled during that time that we're subconsciously carrying with us, and it's informing our present day relationships.
Yeah, I think on a subconscious level, it's that story that we've been told, and we, in a way, don't even recognize that we still believe. That we believe to be true about ourselves, that we believe to be true about the world, and being able to, I think, acknowledge your story is a huge part of becoming a really healthy person to be in relationship with, and what therapy is also really good for. Do you think that therapy is something that's for everyone?
I may be biased, but yes. I do believe that everyone can benefit from therapy because it gives you a safe space. So there's a difference to me when someone says running is therapy for me. It's therapeutic for you, but it's not teaching you how to set boundaries. And it gives you languaging and tools that you won't get from a therapeutic experience. I'll hear that a lot. Like, well, my girlfriends are my therapy.
Yeah. They're not trained to be objective. They're not trained to recognize things on a psychological level that may be happening. And they don't know the whole story a lot of the times. They know what we tell them.
And also they're showing up with their projection, and transference happens. In finding the right clinician to work with, they can really create the safety to feel like, okay, I have an extra set of eyes here, right? We need that blind spot monitor. And I'm not going to take it personally because I know they're doing their own work. And, the more work you do on yourself, you can recognize someone's projection versus
what's true.
what's true.
I noticed you mentioned not taking it personally. And this is something I've always been concerned about in the process of finding a good therapist. How do you break up, make up, find the one that's right for you if there's one out there? You know, it can be quite a process of maybe very similar to dating where you're trying to find the right person to be that safe space. So any tips to help with that?
Yeah, I mean, I went through that myself as well. Two things happen. Either people haven't had a therapeutic relationship, so they don't know what to look for,
Right.
or two, they've had a really negative experience, which is quite often. I mean, how often do you go to a therapist and maybe it wasn't, and then you need therapy from the therapy? But like dating, when it's right, you feel it. I think it's important to know, what you're hoping to get out of the experience. Being clear on that. Most therapists offer a 15-minute phone consultation.
Right.
And then you're going to be able to tell within that first session you like someone's approach or style, if there's chemistry there. The other thing also to remember is they're modeling a secure relationship. They're lending their nervous system to you. So what it's designed for is that you're able to take that relationship from session and extend it out into your other relationships, so you know what to look for in terms of safety and security. So a lot of the clients,
Oh my God.
yeah,
I just had a light bulb go off. My therapist would have me like go through a conversation, say I had a conflict, like a conflicting conversation that I knew was coming up. And my therapist knows this. So what they do is they provide that safe space to go through and have that conversation. I'm then able to go out into the world and have that challenging conversation. It's a little less scary.
so they're exposing you in a safe container and giving you an opportunity for self-expression. Then you can feel a little bit more confident, and then through time that extends and extends.
So when it comes to a couple and say that they're interested in therapy, is the right time to come before there are issues? Should you come individually? Should you come when there's a big problem that they need to have a mediation for?
It depends on the couple. So I see a lot of individuals who are in partnership and have never been to couples therapy, or who are entering partnership. And so they're bringing their partner into their own experience, and maybe their partner seeing someone else individually. Now, in terms of coming as a couple into therapy, there's a few different ways to do it. One, perhaps you do want to do it in the beginning or before a move-in or before marriage, in order to make sure that you're both on the same page and that you have the tools and sort of moving forward. And then I think where most people land is, okay, we're having some difficulty functioning on our own, and we can use an extra set of eyes here to help us make sure that we're communicating with one another in a way where we both understand one another.
That communication piece, I feel, is the key. For a long time, I rejected that because it seemed like a cop-out whenever couples would say, oh, communication, that's what makes it work. But you realize really quickly when you are in partnership, especially, how communicating with a therapist can improve the language that you have with the people around you.
Yeah, that's such a good point, because we have our perception of ourselves and how we communicate and how that lands, but how was it received? So there's what I say and my intent behind it, and then how it landed for someone else. And this is true in all relationships. Within the context of therapy and working with a therapist, what's really beautiful is when someone brings in conversations from their relationship, we're able to unpack that and peel it away and say, like, okay, well, what about this? And begin to teach them modeling for more effective communication. So for example, something that I often tell clients is, when you are approaching someone about something that doesn't sit well with you, make sure that you're highlighting the behavior and not them as an individual, and how that behavior impacts you. And that's the first key to alleviating some of that personalization, right? Because anyone, myself included, as a trained professional, if someone's like, and you always,
you language is it's a bomb in the conversation. I personally am learning how not to use we language. It's not a me we thing. I'm learning to say, no, you, like, these things are you things, they're not me things. So I don't need to be putting myself in that space with you.
the right support through community, literature, through podcasts like this. I think of podcasts almost like an introduction to like group therapy.
Yeah.
It's like almost like being in a support group in a way where like if you were too nervous to do that, podcasts give you the opportunity to be exposed and say, I'm not alone.
Yeah.
And then maybe through that experience of listening to someone else's story, you say, okay, I'll go take the class, or I'll go to the workshop. Maybe I'll book that consultation
Or
call.
I'll have that, or have that
Yeah.
conversation. I know I've learned so much from, the couples already this season. I feel so much more free because I know there's a community that's out there. I've got the therapist support to be able to talk that conversation through before I have it with the person. And you're right, there is this sort of, when you have your team and when you have your support system, it really does. It takes a village to stay in a healthy relationship, to stay married, they definitely say it with parenting, but it takes a village, I think, to really be a healthy, happy human being in a world like this.
Absolutely. And we're wired for connection. And I feel like when it comes to something such as relationships or mental health, there's such a stigma around seeking support. It's not coming from a place of like, you're broken. It's coming from a place of, I can find expansion, support, and connection with others.
Yeah.
And I can see it in you. You really do have this gift, and you have this sort of calming, naturally generous like effect on people that makes them feel safe. And that's something I wish everybody has in their relationships. Whether you're single, you can find a therapist who gives you that.
Thank you so much for saying that. That feels so good to hear. And I completely agree. For many clients that work with me, when we sit down and we look at the relationships in their life that are reciprocal or safe or stable, sometimes they don't have it. They haven't ever had it. And part of my work with them is providing and modeling that safety and security, so they have that reinforcement once a week, and then they can start expecting that same treatment and behavior and consistency with people in their extended world.
I think as we become a more therapized culture and it becomes very common for people to be in therapy, my hope is that there is an extension of that person who can then do that for other people, to be able to say, he's not just having a bad day, or he's not just always like this, she's not just never reliable, or all these things. It's actually informed by something, and we can be a lot more empathetic and more loving towards coworkers, towards our friends, our family members, our partners. I think we can actually start to understand that they're playing out a story sometimes, and if you give them 5 minutes, they might come back with an apology, or even you can extend that sort of grace to them enough to be able to say, hey, what you said came off a little like this. Are you okay? To be able to ask those loving questions in all of our relationships.
The more compassion we have for ourselves, the more we can extend it to others. And that's exactly what you're touching upon. And the more we're able to recognize our own shadows and the parts of ourselves that we deem unacceptable, then we aren't so judgmental about other people's shadow rearing up. Not to accept toxic behavior, but come from a place of, that's interesting. I understand it. Let me approach this with some curiosity.
Yeah. Or even if I don't understand it, I can still approach it with curiosity instead of automatically making judgments about how the person feels, or maybe that judgment that you make comes back to you, and it's like, now you believe something about yourself that's not true, and it was not informed by anything that you said or did. It was just part of their reaction to, to a circumstance. What are some of the common narratives that you think people get wrong about relationships?
That it's about finding a person who can meet all of your needs.
Yeah.
I don't know why we still believe that one. That it's because it's just impossible.
Well, it's been sold to us.
Yeah.
Through fairy tale, through look at any TV series or movie. The way I reflect back on the movies of my teens and early 20s and TV series, Hello, Sex and the City.
Yep.
is completely different now after years of self-reflection and development. So I think that's why a podcast like this is so important, in having community and listening to people's stories, because most likely what you're seeing is probably sometimes a really toxic.
Oh yeah, Carrie Ann Big were toxic.
Toxic.
People
Now I
lying.
look back and I go, Aiden's great. Find me an Aiden. At the time, I was like, oh, Aiden.
I know.
We'll be right back with more of the Love Department after this short break.
You talked about differing modalities, and I think that's a really important thing with therapy to point out, is that certain types don't always work for everyone.
Sometimes therapy, specifically talk therapy, gets really bad rap because not every approach or modality is going to work for every individual. Of course, we're complex beings that have so many experiences that we're coming into the therapy room with. Imagine if everyone, like you're saying, they had this trauma-informed lens, we would relate to each other so differently. Mm-hmm. So I think that that's important. And then, yes, there are so many different approaches and modalities out there, right? There's CBT, which is more of a behavioral therapy. There's somatic therapy, where you're getting into your body and it's not so much talking. There's trauma reprocessing, like EMDR. I work with parts therapy, so I'm a relational coach and therapist that works from the lens of systems thinking. So looking at the whole system. And I really like working with parts, because when we can get to know each part of ourself and how that part is showing up mm-hmm. in our life, it takes the shame away of feeling that there's something wrong with us, or that we did something wrong. Mm-hmm. Versus, that's interesting, this part showing up. What was that reaction really about? Mm-hmm. Why does a part of me react in that way?
When you decided to take this on as a profession, I wanted to ask you kind of your journey to coming to being here.
Yeah, that's a great question, because I don't know that I chose it. Mm-hmm. I mean, I ultimately did. Mm-hmm. I believe they say that therapists, like great therapists, are born or developed in their family of origin, and I believe that. I was a highly attuned, intuitive, sensitive child, and I assumed the role of being the family therapist. It's a role that just really felt good to me. And the realization came to me through a very long and hard journey. Actually, it was interesting because my freshman year of college, I went to a college that I was sort of, directed to go to. Mm-hmm. It wasn't my dream school, and they didn't have the program that I wanted to do. And one of the classes I had in my first year of college was marriage and family.
Wait, that was a class in college? I would have loved that class.
And it was amazing. It was amazing.
Do they still teach it? Can I go back and retake this?
Probably. I should look it up. I've been curious myself. I loved this class. And then my other love was horses growing up. From the first time I encountered animals, that was my first love. And so had I known that there was a modality called equine assisted psychotherapy, I probably would be exactly where I am now. Yet the journey to get there was like so beautiful.
You mentioned equine therapy. I'm excited for people to get to know about this. Can you talk about what that is and really how that's a therapeutic process for people that maybe they haven't considered?
So there are many different forms of equine therapy. Previous to doing equine assisted psychotherapy, I taught disabled children and adults with equine therapy, and that was more on the horse and working with different skill sets. And then what I work with now is equine assisted psychotherapy. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the work is groundwork in the arena with the horse or horses, and it's very experiential. And so how this works is I run groups with the horses. Horses have so much to teach us, because in order to survive in the wild, they're naturally hypervigilant. their life depends upon it. So a horse's brain and a human's brain that's been through trauma and has PTSD are actually quite similar. So the resonance that someone finds in the presence of a horse is healing within itself. Yet when we combine that with this therapeutic modality and facilitate, it is amazing the healing that could happen.
I think that's really incredible, and hopefully, we'll be able to link in the show notes where people can find equine therapy near them, because it's probably something they hadn't considered might be really helpful in just developing that therapeutic language within themselves.
No therapist or coach can fix you or fix a marriage or fix a relationship. It's rather they're there to hold the space and ask you the questions that you wouldn't necessarily ask yourself, and desensitize some of those experiences that are most likely informing the day-to-day.
Yeah, I love the show Couples Therapy.
Yes.
I
Oh my
watched the
gosh.
seasons like
So good.
multiple times.
Yes.
And it's very true when you look at some of the couples on the show, they always come in with something that's more than what the problem is, right? And what I believe that Orna does so beautifully is to kind of set the issues aside so that the couples as individuals, but also as a couple and communicating with each other, have space to be able to really hear what's being said on the other side.
Yeah. And that's part of that modeling of active listening, of effective communication. What is the impact that my words have on another?
Yeah, that's a really interesting thing, because I think usually what the narrative you hear is there's one person who's all for therapy and doing this kind of work and being self-reflective and self-aware, and there's the other partner who is just doing their own thing. How do you bridge that gap when you feel like there's just that resistance from the other person to do this kind of work?
Well, in terms of them coming in as a couple and they don't want to come in, or if an individual, so oftentimes what I'll have is working with an individual and they're in a partnership and they don't feel like their partner's doing the work.
Right.
And of course, that's going to impact them, right? You can't want something for someone else. There has to be a willingness. And getting really curious about their resistance. What about going to a therapist do you feel resistant about? I think it's in how you approach it to someone, because there oftentimes when people in partnership, the topic of therapy comes up, is like, you need to go to therapy, or we need to go to therapy to and it's like very much in a heightened state.
Yeah.
Versus if you were to go to your partner and say, I'm feeling A, B, and C, and I feel that if we had support in learning how to better, that's such a softer way of approaching something.
And it's not a you thing. It's not a me thing. It's a
we thing.
It's a we thing.
It's not about doing what's right for us. It's about doing what's right for the relationship.
Yeah. That transition, honestly, is really hard for some people.
Yeah.
You have to sometimes adjust and start living a little bit differently than you would have if it was just you. I remember when I first got my dog for the first time, and there was a company happy hour or something, and I wanted to go to that after work, but then I realized I had this brand new puppy that was home all alone and missed me all day and needed to go out and pee, and I needed to be that person for my dog. And it's the same thing when we come into relationships. Each one, I think, asks something a little bit different of us, but being able to make the space and adjustments to accommodate the needs of someone else as well as your own is tricky. It's not natural to us, I think.
And what you're really speaking to is commitment, because when you're in devotion to someone or something, we're willing to put aside the inconvenience to prioritize the overall picture. The same thing happened to me when I got my dog. I had never had a dog on my own. Grew up with dogs, grew up with horses, absolutely love animals. And the first 6 months were really rough. I remember I called my dad and I was like, he's like, how's it going with the dog? And I said, this is so hard. This is so difficult, getting up in the morning, all the things. And so I said to my dad, this is so hard, but it's so much love. And he said to me, that's what love is. That's commitment. I'm like, oh, I've never been in love before then because I love this dog more than any boyfriend.
Yeah, and I was never willing to do the work before. It's
Yeah.
so
And
true.
I always remind myself of that experience. So it's
Yeah.
so much work. It's so much love. But when you're really devoted to the path, then that allows us to put aside our ego and say, how might me leaning into this perceived inconvenience enrich
Right.
the relationship and the experience?
That's really good. Yeah, I think there was one of the couples on the show, Felicia, she made a comment about when you have a passion for something, you'll inconvenience yourself over and over in order to see it through.
When you're really connected to your why in anything that you do, that is what takes you through the marathon of a relationship.
Especially as a couple. I think that's one thing that's important as a couple, to kind of figure out why you're together early.
Absolutely. Also surprised, oftentimes so many people don't.
They don't know.
They don't know. They don't ask themselves.
No.
That's why individual work is so important.
Yeah.
Before you're in partnership, if you're able to, because you learn so much about yourself and it allows you to have a so much more easeful time out there because you know
what you're looking for. Yeah. And that's a pretty interesting topic, because that was one thing that Allie in this season mentioned, was she also did some kind of manifesting work before she met her partner. And when I tell you that her partner Chuck is kind of a unicorn of a person for her, do you think that it's possible to write it down on a piece of paper, put it on a vision board, to call in somebody to be in partnership with?
I think they can be the first steps to calling it in. Absolutely. You know, and everyone's different. We all have a different journey in terms of divine timing. So I think it can start with that intention and the list or the visualization. Yet sometimes those things can be the very things that prevent us from, you know, when it comes, like, we have to ask ourselves, like, do we want a great love, or do we want what we think great love is? And if we really want a great love story, it might not show up exactly as we envision it. And so we have to be careful to hold it lightly.
I've seen it play out so many times for couples where, you know, they go to therapy as like a last resort. And I just wish that they had the tools as individuals to be able to address the needs and the issues that they're inevitably going to come up against because they're in relationship. And also that relationships are designed to bring this stuff up.
Yeah.
That is the thing that I think once I got that out of my head, the fairy tale, the feel good, the right off into the sunset, once I got comfortable with feeling like, oh, I'm not the best at this, or like, I'm so annoyed. Why am I annoyed? Like, you know, once I got used to that kind of conversation within myself, I was able to see my partner as somebody who was helping me.
Yeah, they're not sabotaging your journey. They're elevating your growth. So something we can ask ourselves is, how might this trigger or this person or this situation be supporting my growth? Because we have to understand, the more that we can hold the duality within ourselves of the light and the shadow, we can also hold that in our relation to others. Yet so often everyone wants to get to the light.
Yeah, well, they think love is just the light, but love is both. Love is the
both.
light and the shadow.
Yes. And the shadow is not so scary. It is the resistance to looking at the shadow that keeps us stuck.
Having a partner, when you do find that person who can hold that space, can be that safe place, when you look at the shadow, you feel like you're looking at it together. And even though those conversations are hard, even though they are so intense, sometimes you can't find any light and it's like being in a dark room and there's furniture and you're bumping into stuff. There is such a peace and a comfort when you know that the shadow is not the problem. The shadow is part of the relationship, and it's there so that it can be brought to light, so that you both can grow and heal and become the best versions of yourself. That your partner really wants that for you, and you want that for them, and that's it.
Yeah.
There's no issues. It's just that you want what's best.
And that's such a gift to have someone that you feel can walk beside you, vice versa. That's really what partnership is.
Yeah. You are a lot less alone when you're navigating the dark. It's great to have them in the light too. Those mountaintop moments, like those are amazing to have somebody to cheer you on and celebrate. But when you're in the dark, that's when you really, really need that partnership.
You've been listening to The Love Department, hosted by Nik Lockhart. The Love Department is produced in Brooklyn, New York. A special thank you to Courtney for being here with us today. If you're interested in following up with her, you can find more information in our show notes. Also, special thanks to producer Karen Minto and sound engineer Bree Seeley. Our theme song is Love by Adam Baldick. Please stay in touch with us. You can reach out on the Heartline and have questions answered by experts like Courtney, who'll be visiting us again, I'm sure. Check out our website at www.love-department.com. For more content from this episode, you can check out our Patreon. Your support goes a long way in producing a show like this. And while you're here, leave us a review and subscribe to this podcast. Okay, hand on your heart for the 4 count. I wish you love.